Welcome, dear listener. I'm so glad you've joined me tonight. This is your time to unwind, to let the worries of the day slip away, and to sink into a space of calm and comfort. All you need to do now is find a cozy position, close your eyes if you'd like, and let the soft rhythm of storytelling carry you gently toward rest. Tonight, we travel back in time to a chapter of history that remained hidden for decades. It is not a tale of glory shouted on the battlefield, but a quiet, secret story of creativity and courage, where artists and dreamers became soldiers of deception, and imagination itself was turned into a weapon of war. Take a slow breath in, and a gentle breath out. Allow the sounds of this story to drift around you, soft and steady, as we begin our journey into the world of the Ghost Army of World War II. Chapter 1: Shadows. Before the stage. Before the Ghost Army ever stepped onto the fields of Europe, before their inflatable tanks rose like phantoms on the horizon, before their radios hummed with voices that did not exist, there was silence. It was the silence of waiting, of ideas forming, of secrets being drawn on paper in dimly lit rooms. The Second World War had begun years earlier, and by the early 1940s, it had consumed nearly every corner of the globe. Nations fought across deserts and mountains, seas and skies. In Europe, the German war machine seemed unstoppable. Armored columns rolled across borders with frightening speed. Cities fell, and entire populations were brought under occupation. The Allies, America, Britain, and their partners faced a grim task: to push back against this tide. But pushing back required more than courage and more than sheer force. War is not only fought with weapons, but with perception, with fear, with what the enemy thinks they see. The Allies understood this, and somewhere in the halls of command, the idea began to take shape. Perhaps the enemy could be defeated not just with strength, but with shadows. To understand how unusual this thought was, imagine yourself as a commander in 1942. The world around you is filled with steel and smoke. Tanks weigh tons. Ships cut through the seas with engines roaring. Soldiers march in the thousands. Every part of war is heavy, brutal, and physical. And yet, in the middle of this, someone suggests fighting with nothing more than air, rubber, sound, and light. They propose creating whole divisions that do not exist, armies that live only in the imagination of the enemy. It sounds absurd, almost laughable, and yet history is filled with moments when the absurd becomes the extraordinary. The idea drew inspiration from older tricks of warfare. Long ago, generals had used deception as quietly as they used swords. The Greeks left a wooden horse outside the gates of Troy, not as a gift, but as a ruse. Roman legions lit great numbers of campfires to exaggerate their presence. Even in more recent wars, camouflage had become an art, nets thrown over guns, paint streaked across helmets. But this new plan was different. It was not about hiding. It was about showing. It was about creating something convincing where nothing existed. And so, the outlines of a secret unit began to form. In 1943, the US Army officially created a group that, on paper, looked ordinary: the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. The name gave nothing away. It sounded like just another military unit among thousands. But behind that dry name lay a secret, unlike any other. This unit would not be made of traditional soldiers. Instead, it would be built from artists, designers, sound engineers, and radio operators. Their task: to deceive, to mislead, to perform. The gathering of these men was itself a strange process. Recruiters searched art schools and advertising agencies, looking for talent in unexpected places. They sought men who could draw, who could sculpt, who could design stage sets, who understood how sound carried through air. Some of the names who joined would later become famous: fashion designer Bill Blass, for instance, and artist Ellsworth Kelly. At the time, they were young men, drafted or enlisted like so many others, but their skills were unusual. The army saw in them not fighters, but illusionists. Training began quietly, hidden from view. Instead of learning to fire rifles with precision, these men learned how to inflate rubber tanks until they looked real under the sun. Instead of practicing bayonet charges, they practiced how to arrange dummy artillery in convincing positions. Instead of studying battle formations, they studied how to mimic radio signals and replicate the chatter of entire divisions. Picture them in those early days. A sculptor stands beside an inflatable jeep, tugging at its rubber sides, trying to make it look less like a balloon and more like steel. A sound engineer crouches by a speaker, adjusting dials as recordings of tank engines echo across an empty field. A painter, who once set brush to canvas, now sketches the placement of tents and laundry lines to suggest the presence of hundreds of invisible soldiers. These were not ordinary drills. They were rehearsals for performances that would take place on the largest stage in the world. The tools of their trade were strange and fragile. Inflatable tanks and artillery were rolled up into bundles that could fit on the back of a truck. When needed, they were unrolled, inflated, and arranged in neat lines. From the air, or from a distance, they looked convincing. Shadows fell across them the same way shadows fell across real tanks. To an enemy scanning through binoculars, they seemed heavy, powerful, and ready to fight. Only up close would the illusion collapse. Sound was their second weapon. The army recorded every noise it could capture: the grinding of tank treads, the whir of engines, the shuffle of boots, the hammering of construction. These sounds were layered into tapes, which could be played through enormous speakers mounted on trucks. At night, when the world was quiet, these sounds carried for miles. To anyone listening in the darkness, it would feel as though an entire division was on the move, when in fact only a few men stood nearby. Then came radio, the invisible thread that tied it all together. Skilled operators learned to mimic the unique patterns of real divisions. Each unit had its own rhythm of communication, its own way of speaking. The Ghost Army operators practiced until they could replicate them flawlessly. Messages were sent and intercepted, feeding false intelligence directly into German hands. Together, these tricks created illusions that were nearly impossible to untangle. A German scout might see tanks in a meadow. At night, he might hear engines and men shouting. His radio intercepts would confirm that a division was present. Every sense told him the same story, and yet it was all smoke and mirrors. But before they could perform on the real stage of Europe, the Ghost Army lived in waiting. They practiced, rehearsed, refined. They inflated tanks and deflated them again. They tested speakers in fields and forests. They studied the way sunlight caught on rubber, the way tracks pressed into dirt, the way voices echoed across valleys. Every detail had to be right, because every detail mattered. The men themselves lived in an odd space between soldier and performer. They wore uniforms, yes. They drilled and marched when ordered, but in their hearts, many still thought like artists. Some kept sketchbooks, filling them with drawings of camp life, of comrades inflating dummies, of the strange and fleeting moments of their secret mission. Others wrote letters home, hinting at the unusual work they were doing, though never able to reveal the truth. Secrecy wrapped around them like a cloak. This secrecy was heavy. Families at home believed their sons were ordinary soldiers, fighting ordinary battles. Fellow troops who passed by might see strange rubber tanks, or overhear odd noises and never quite understand. The ghost army could not explain, could not share. They carried their role quietly, known only to themselves and to a handful of commanders. And yet, within that silence, there was pride. They understood that if their tricks succeeded, if their illusions worked, lives would be saved. Every German battalion that marched toward shadows left real Allied soldiers unchallenged. Every artillery shell fired at rubber was one less aimed at flesh and bone. In this way, their unusual mission carried immense weight. As 1944 approached, the moment drew near when rehearsal would end and performance would begin. The Allies were preparing for the invasion of Europe, the largest operation in history. And when the time came, the ghost army would be there, waiting in the wings, ready to step onto the stage of war, not with bullets and blood, but with shadows and whispers. Theirs was a strange beginning, a unit of artists and dreamers hidden inside a wall of steel. A theatre troupe rehearsing in silence while the world burned around them. Few knew of them, fewer understood them, and yet, in the quiet of their preparations, something remarkable was taking shape. A ghostly army, born of imagination, ready to walk the battlefields of Europe and leave footprints no one could ever truly trace. And so the curtain lifted. The stage was set. The ghost army stood ready to perform unseen, unheard, uncelebrated, until decades later, when at last their story would drift out of the shadows. Chapter 2, The Secret Beginnings. The story of the ghost army begins not with tanks or guns, not with battlefields drenched in smoke, but with an idea. A strange, almost unbelievable idea. That art, the delicate brush of paint, the patient shaping of clay, the quiet arrangement of light and sound could be used as a weapon of war. It was 1944, and the world was at its breaking point. The Second World War had already raged for years, consuming nations and leaving millions in its wake. The Allies, preparing for decisive movements across Europe, knew that brute strength alone would not be enough. The Germans were fierce, disciplined, and clever. They watched every road, every bridge, every field for signs of invasion. To defeat such an enemy, the Allies needed more than just firepower. They needed deception. And so, somewhere within the guarded halls of military planning, a proposal emerged. What if they could create an army that didn't exist? An army of illusions, tanks that were only rubber and air, trucks that weighed almost nothing, soldiers who were actors in uniform, an army that could be seen and heard, but never truly touched. The idea sounded absurd, but it was not new. Throughout history, deception had always played a part in warfare. Ancient generals lit extra campfires at night to trick their enemies into thinking they commanded vast numbers. Commanders arranged dummies on the battlefield, hoping to mislead scouts into overestimating their strength. Even in the First World War, camouflage had been used to disguise artillery and bunkers. But this new vision was bolder, larger, and more daring. It wasn't about hiding, it was about creating something out of nothing. Thus, in great secrecy, the US Army established the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. That was the official name. Plain, bureaucratic, unremarkable. But behind that dry title was something extraordinary. This was not a division of hardened infantry or seasoned tank crews. No, the men chosen for this mission were something else entirely. They were artists, sound engineers, designers, and inventors. Men who had once painted theatre backdrops in New York, sculpted figures in small-town studios, sketched illustrations for magazines, or tinkered with sound recordings in dusty radio rooms. Now, they were asked to trade brushes for helmets, pencils for radios, and stage lights for the unforgiving landscapes of war. Imagine their first days together. A sculptor, accustomed to marble, now being handed a blueprint for a tank made of rubber. A sound engineer who once recorded jazz bands in Chicago, now asked to capture the grinding clatter of armored divisions. A set designer who once painted castles for Broadway audiences, now tasked with arranging inflatable artillery on a French hillside. At first, there must have been laughter. How could art stand against bombs and bullets? But soon the gravity of it sank in. Their weapons were shadows. Their battlefield was perception itself. The training began quietly, far from the front lines. Inflatable tanks were tested, enormous rubber shells that, once filled with air, looked uncannily real. From a distance, or from the sky, it was impossible to tell the difference. Men learned how to stake them to the ground so they would not sway in the wind. They practiced arranging them in neat lines, just as real armored divisions would. They experimented with tire tracks pressed into the soil, with footprints scattered across the mud, with fake laundry strung between tents to suggest hundreds of invisible soldiers lived there. Every detail mattered. Every illusion had to be convincing. Then came the sound. Trucks were fitted with giant loudspeakers, and sound engineers experimented with recordings of tanks rolling over gravel. Trucks grinding gears, voices barking orders, even the distant thunder of artillery. These sounds were carefully layered and broadcast at night, echoing across valleys and fields, carrying for miles. To an enemy listening from afar, it would sound as though thousands of men and machines were on the move, when in truth, only a handful of performers stood behind the curtain. The deception did not stop there. Radio operators joined the troupe, their job not to fight but to mimic. They created fake radio chatter, imitating the unique rhythms and personalities of real units. Each division had its own style of communication, its quirks and patterns. The Ghost Army operators studied them, copied them, and then broadcast false messages. To the Germans, listening carefully to intercepted signals, it would appear as though an entire armored unit was camped somewhere, even if in reality that unit was hundreds of miles away. Together, these three tricks, visual, sound, and radio, formed the backbone of the Ghost Army's craft. A stage performance on a scale the world had never seen. Except there was no audience applause at the end. Only silence, secrecy, and the hope that the enemy had been fooled. Life within the Ghost Army was peculiar, unlike any other in the military. While ordinary soldiers drilled with rifles, these men practiced inflating tanks and adjusting the pitch of recorded engines. While others dug trenches, they discussed how shadows might fall across a dummy artillery piece. Their camp was a strange mixture of soldiering and theatre. Helmets sat next to sketchbooks. Blueprints for inflatables were passed around like stage props. And yet, beneath the strangeness, there was purpose. Every man knew that their illusions could save lives, countless lives. Still, secrecy weighed heavily. Families back home received vague letters, never detailed, never revealing. "We're doing something unusual," some might write. But it matters. Few could guess that their sons were actors in the most dangerous stage play in history. And even among fellow soldiers, few knew the truth. Other divisions, who passed by the inflatables, sometimes laughed, not realizing the depth of the plan. The Ghost Army learned to shrug it off. Their work was not for glory, not for medals, not even for recognition. It was for survival. At times, the strangeness of it all must have struck them. A man who once painted watercolors now crouched behind a rubber Sherman tank, pretending to load shells that did not exist. Another man, who had studied architecture, now sketched out the placement of fake vehicles across a meadow as though composing a stage scene. Theirs was a war of creativity, fought not with blood and steel, but with imagination, and perhaps that made it even more surreal. The first tests of their skills came in Europe. Small operations at first, cautious rehearsals on the fringes of real battle. They inflated their tanks, broadcast their sounds, and waited to see if the Germans would take the bait. And remarkably, they did. Scouts reported large armored divisions where none existed. German forces shifted to meet phantom threats. For the Ghost Army, it was proof that their strange mission was working. Proof that shadows and whispers could move armies, yet every success carried risks. If the enemy discovered the truth, if they realized the tanks were only air, the chatter only mimicry, the illusion would collapse. The Ghost Army lived with this constant tension. They had to be perfect, every detail precise. A single mistake could unravel everything, and so they rehearsed, refined, and performed again. Theirs was not a single show, but a series of acts across Europe, each more daring than the last. And though the world outside remained unaware, within the quiet corners of Allied command, their value was recognized. They were not ordinary soldiers. They were tricksters, illusionists, and saviors. A ghostly army whose footsteps left no trace, but whose presence shaped the course of battles. The beginnings of their story were humble, uncertain, even laughable, but as the days stretched into months, and as their illusions became more polished, it was clear that this peculiar group of artists and engineers had carved out a place in history. They were proof that creativity could be a shield, that imagination could be a weapon, and that sometimes the most powerful force on the battlefield is not what the enemy sees, but what they believe. And so the Ghost Army began its quiet march into legend. Their origins were hidden, their work classified, their names unknown, but in those early days, in the rehearsals of deception and the first timid performances of illusion, the foundation was laid. A foundation for a story that would remain untold for decades, locked away in silence, until the world was finally ready to hear about the soldiers who fought with shadows. Chapter 3. First Deceptions in Europe. The Ghost Army's first steps into Europe were cautious ones. They did not arrive with the thunder of artillery or the deep rumble of tanks across fields. Instead, they slipped into the continent like whispers, quiet and careful, blending into the vast machinery of war that was unfolding around them. It was the summer of 1944. The Allies had landed in Normandy, and the long-awaited liberation of Europe had begun. Cities still groaned under German occupation, villages were caught in the path of retreating armies, and every road, every hedgerow, every river crossing mattered. The German command, skilled and unyielding, sought to predict Allied movements at every turn, and into this tense, uncertain theatre, the Ghost Army was finally deployed. Their mission was simple on paper, but complex in execution. Create the illusion of strength where there was none, and mask the absence of troops where real armies prepared to strike. They were shadows, meant to mislead German eyes and ears, buying time and space for the advancing Allies. Imagine their first night in France. A convoy of trucks rumbling slowly down narrow roads, headlights hooded to avoid drawing attention. In the back of those trucks were not crates of ammunition or barrels of fuel, but bundles of canvas and rubber, carefully folded and tied. Inflatable tanks, silent and weightless, waiting to be brought to life. At dawn, the men unrolled their creations across a meadow. With air pumps hissing, shapes began to rise, first flat, then rounded, and finally towering into the unmistakable silhouette of Sherman tanks. From a distance, It was uncanny. Row upon row of armored beasts appeared to squat heavily on the ground, their turrets facing east. Yet a soldier could lift one corner with a single hand. They were illusions, fragile as balloons, yet powerful in what they suggested. The sound units were next. Trucks equipped with massive speakers backed into position along hedgerows. The engineers set up their recordings, carefully chosen for the moment. Soon, the quiet countryside filled with the deep growl of engines, the metallic clank of treads, the faint shouts of men. The sounds rolled across valleys and rivers, echoing into the distance. 2 German scouts, listening carefully in the night. It would seem as though an armored column was on the move. Meanwhile, the radio operators went to work. Their task was perhaps the most delicate. Sitting in makeshift tents with equipment humming softly, they began to mimic the chatter of real divisions. Messages were sent back and forth, repeating the patterns, the small quirks, the unique signatures of different units. If the Germans intercepted these signals, they would be convinced that an entire division was encamped here, waiting to strike. The effect was astonishing. Reports trickled back from intelligence units. German forces had shifted to counter-threats that did not exist. Bridges were guarded, troops were redeployed, artillery repositioned, all to face phantoms conjured from rubber, sound, and static. The Ghost Army had performed its first trick, and it had worked. For the men themselves, those first operations were surreal. They were soldiers, yes, but they felt more like stagehands working behind the curtain of a vast, dangerous play. Some inflated tanks under the cover of night, pounding stakes into the earth, checking for folds in the rubber that might give away the illusion. Others carried rolls of barbed wire to surround their camp, adding authenticity to the scene. Some strung up laundry lines, planting the suggestion of entire regiments living nearby. Every detail mattered, down to the smallest footprint in the mud. And always there was the tension, the possibility of discovery. If German scouts approached too closely, if they dared to touch one of the inflatable tanks, the trick would unravel in an instant. If a shell landed among them, the rubber would collapse, revealing the emptiness inside. For that reason, the Ghost Army lived with a constant edge of unease. Their safety depended on distance, on shadows, on the enemy believing without looking too closely. Still, the operations grew bolder. They moved from meadows to villages, arranging convoys of rubber vehicles along dusty roads, creating the impression of divisions on the march. They parked dummy trucks beside real bridges to make them appear heavily guarded. They lit campfires, played music on record players, even set up fake headquarters tents with maps and typewriters. Soldiers walking nearby might glance inside and see officers bent over their work, never realizing they were actors playing roles. For the people of France, too, the illusions were strange to behold. Villagers who crept out from hiding to watch the Allied advance sometimes stumbled upon fields of tanks that could be pushed with a single hand. They whispered among themselves, unsure whether to laugh or to keep silent. In those dangerous days, even laughter could be risky, and so the Ghost Army carried on, largely unseen, their true role hidden beneath the broader tide of liberation. The Germans, however, were not so easily amused. Their scouts reported these phantom armies with deadly seriousness. One German officer, years later, would remark that the Allies seemed to appear everywhere at once, divisions sprouting in unexpected places, tanks materializing overnight. He could not have known that much of it was air and canvas. Yet not every deception went smoothly. There were close calls, moments when discovery loomed. In one operation, a farmer wandered into a field where the inflatables stood, tugging curiously at the rubber surface of a tank. a soldier rushed over, laughing nervously, and shooed him away. In another, German artillery began shelling the encampment, and the men scrambled to protect the fragile structures, knowing that one direct hit would reveal their trick. Somehow, luck and skill carried them through. Through it all, the men of the Ghost Army adjusted to their peculiar life. By day, they were stagehands of war, arranging illusions across the countryside. By night, they were quiet, reflective, sometimes sketching scenes in notebooks, sometimes writing letters they could never fully explain. The weight of secrecy pressed on them. They could not tell their families what they were truly doing. They could not boast of their successes to other soldiers. They carried their victories in silence, hidden even from those who marched beside them. But deep down, they knew. They knew that their work saved lives. Every German unit that chased after phantoms left real Allied soldiers unchallenged. Every artillery barrage aimed at an inflatable tank was one less aimed at a living man. And that knowledge kept them going. As the weeks stretched into months, the Ghost Army gained confidence. Their illusions grew more elaborate, their timing sharper, their coordination smoother. They were no longer simply experimenting, they were performing, again and again, across the great stage of war-torn Europe. And each time, they proved that art and imagination could hold power equal to steel and fire. Their first deceptions in Europe did not win battles outright, but they tilted the balance. They slowed German responses, pulled enemy units away from critical points, and created confusion at moments when clarity might have changed the tide. They were not heroes in the traditional sense. They did not charge into combat or raise flags over liberated cities, but they were something else, shadows in the mist, the suggestion of power, the whisper of strength. Looking back, one can almost imagine the quiet pride that must have filled them, standing at the edge of a field, watching rubber tanks glisten in the morning sun, knowing that somewhere out there, an enemy commander was staring at the same sight and trembling at the wrong conclusion. That was their victory, invisible, intangible, but real. And so, the Ghost Army settled into its strange rhythm. Day by day, operation by operation, they became more than an experiment. They became a weapon, a ghostly presence across Europe, unseen yet felt, unheard yet loud, unreal yet profoundly effective. It was only the beginning. Greater challenges lay ahead, and with them, even greater illusions. But in those first deceptions, tentative and uncertain, the Ghost Army proved itself. They had shown that shadows could fight, that silence could mislead, and that in the darkest days of war, imagination still had a role to play. Nearby, a soldier gently checks the seams of a rubber Sherman, pressing and adjusting until it holds the perfect shape. Another kneels beside a dummy artillery piece, smoothing out folds in the canvas, ensuring that sunlight will cast the correct shadows across its surface. Everything is arranged to deceive, yet nothing is permanent. This is a world where appearance is everything, and reality is optional. Camouflage became a science of subtlety. The Ghost Army discovered that even the smallest imperfections could betray the illusion. Campfires were lit using lanterns and mirrors to create the illusion of smoke rising in several directions. Reflective surfaces were carefully positioned to catch the morning sun, hinting at tents and equipment that were not really there. Tracks in the mud were laid out in patterns that suggested movement of heavy vehicles, though the vehicles themselves were no more than inflatable decoys. To the enemy, every sight, every sound, every signal reinforced the illusion that an entire division was present. They studied how the enemy perceived the world, what scouts would expect to see, what signals officers would believe, what sounds would suggest danger. By understanding the mind of the observer, they could create illusions that were almost impossible to detect. Each decision, each adjustment, was made with the enemy's expectations in mind. In this way, the Ghost Army became both scientist and artist, crafting a reality that existed only in the perceptions of others. Beyond the technical mastery, the men themselves developed a quiet confidence. They knew that their success depended on subtlety rather than force, patience rather than aggression. They learned to trust in the illusion, to believe in its power even when it seemed absurd. A single inflatable tank, placed with care and lit at the right angle, could cause hours of confusion for the enemy. A simple radio transmission could redirect a division across miles of countryside, and each success reinforced the idea that imagination could be as powerful as any weapon. As the weeks and months passed, the Ghost Army's techniques became increasingly sophisticated. Operations grew in scale and complexity. They coordinated multiple fake units across vast distances. Sound and visual deception were synchronized. Radio chatter was carefully timed to match the movements of decoy tanks. Even the smallest details, such as footprints, shadow angles, and weather patterns, were accounted for. The result was an illusion so convincing that entire enemy commands were misled repeatedly, sending soldiers and artillery in the wrong direction, often at critical moments. And through all of this, the Ghost Army remained largely unseen and unrecognized. They performed without applause, without medals, and without the knowledge of those they helped protect. Their work was hidden, classified, and deliberately secret, leaving their victories known only to a few Allied commanders. They had transformed war from something purely physical into something almost theatrical, where perception itself became a weapon, and imagination held the power to shape reality. The art of illusion was no longer experimental. It was refined, precise, and deadly effective. The Ghost Army had discovered a fundamental truth. In war, as in life, what people believe can be as important as what is real. Chapter 5. Notable Operations. Famous deceptions. By the time the Ghost Army had honed their techniques, their mission was no longer experimental. They were fully operational, moving across the European landscape, and each operation became a delicate choreography of sight, sound, and imagination. It was time to put their skills to the test, and the results would be extraordinary. Imagine a quiet valley somewhere in northern France. The mist clings to the hillsides, softening every edge. Farmers have long since abandoned their fields, hiding in the shadows as armies march past. Here, a small detachment of the Ghost Army is preparing for its first major mission. Inflatable tanks lie in neat rows, rubber hissing softly as air fills them. Canvas soldiers are arranged in the posture of a division at rest. The air is thick with anticipation, yet strangely calm, as if the land itself senses that something unusual is about to unfold. The sound engineers had been equally meticulous. Large speakers were concealed along tree lines, their dials adjusted so that the noise of engines and marching troops rolled naturally through the valley. When the operation began, the valley echoed with the low rumble of tank engines, punctuated by the clank of metal and the soft shuffle of invisible soldiers. Any German reconnaissance unit, observing from afar, would see and hear exactly what they expected, a full division prepared for action. Radio operators contributed the final layer. Messages were transmitted that mimicked real divisions, down to the smallest cadence of commands and responses. Enemy intercepts captured the chatter, leaving the German command convinced that forces were massed exactly where they were not. The deception worked brilliantly. German units shifted to respond to this phantom threat, redirecting soldiers and artillery away from the real Allied advance. The Ghost Army had pulled off a victory without a shot fired, without a single casualty, relying only on illusion and precision. Another famous operation took place near the French town of Metz. In this case, the Ghost Army's objective was to suggest an impending attack on the city, causing German forces to fortify positions unnecessarily. Inflatable tanks were moved into position under the cover of night, smoke generators placed strategically to suggest the activity of real engines. The Ghost Army had not fought a battle in the traditional sense, but their deception had reshaped the battlefield itself. One particularly remarkable operation involved a complete phantom division moving through the open countryside to distract attention from an Allied crossing. Inflatable tanks, dummy jeeps, and canvas soldiers were laid out in a pattern that suggested a full brigade advancing toward the enemy. The sound engineers created an entire landscape of movement, with overlapping noises that suggested hundreds of vehicles and thousands of troops. From a nearby hill, a German observer might have counted divisions of forces that did not exist. Even the smallest details were attended to. Tracks in the mud were laid out to match the expected weight and movement of heavy vehicles. Smoke from simulated fires suggested cooking soldiers, reinforcing the impression of a fully encamped division. Laundry lines were strung across empty tents, hinting at the routines of 1,000 men. Every sensory cue was intentional, reinforcing the illusion from every possible angle. These operations required constant vigilance. The Ghost Army had to anticipate the enemy's perspective, considering what could be seen, what could be heard, and what assumptions would be made. They practiced moving their inflatables quickly, repositioning sound equipment as needed, and timing radio transmissions to match the apparent movement of troops. One misstep could ruin an operation, and yet the men executed their roles with calm precision, often in the eerie quiet of pre-dawn or twilight hours. In one operation, the Ghost Army created the illusion of an entire armored corps poised to attack along a river. Inflatable tanks were placed on rolling hills, dummy artillery lined the roads, and radio chatter was layered with carefully timed messages. A fake unit, skillfully arranged, could tie down real forces, create hesitation, and alter the course of a campaign without firing a single bullet. This was the essence of psychological warfare, refined to a degree never before seen. Throughout these operations, the men of the Ghost Army adapted and learned. They experimented with different configurations, timing, and environmental conditions. Sometimes they added small elements of humor or whimsy. A dummy soldier posed in a ridiculous stance, or a fake campfire smoking in an improbable place, simply to test whether the enemy would react. Surprisingly often, even these subtle touches were enough to draw attention, reinforcing the overall deception. The impact of these notable operations cannot be overstated. While traditional battles consumed lives and territory, the Ghost Army's missions saved lives. Each successful deception diverted enemy resources, reduced the risk to real troops, and provided strategic advantages that might otherwise have been unattainable. Their victories were quiet, hidden in the folds of history, but they were no less significant for their subtlety. By the end of the war, the Ghost Army had conducted dozens of operations, each mission built upon the last, refining techniques, increasing confidence, and demonstrating the incredible potential of imagination in warfare. Inflatable tanks, dummy artillery, soundscapes, and radio illusions became not mere experiments, but a recognized and highly effective form of strategic deception. And yet, despite these successes, the men remained largely unrecognized. Their work was classified, their achievements unrecorded in the official histories of the time. They returned home quietly, carrying memories of their strange and surreal experiences, knowing that the world would not hear of their exploits for decades. Theirs was a victory of imagination over expectation, subtlety over spectacle, and perception over reality. A quiet triumph that would resonate long after the last tanks had deflated and the battlefields grew still. Chapter 6. Close calls and near discoveries. Even the most carefully planned illusions carry a fragile tension. And the Ghost Army, despite its growing expertise, was no exception. For every flawless operation, there were moments of anxiety, near disasters, and lessons learned in silence. The quiet victories of deception could so easily have been undone by a single misstep, a wandering observer, or a stroke of misfortune. Yet, it was precisely these moments of precariousness that revealed the ingenuity, patience, and calm determination of the men who served in this extraordinary unit. Imagine a small French valley at dawn. Mist drifts lazily across the fields, softening edges and muffling distant sounds. The men of the Ghost Army are moving into position. Inflatable tanks are unrolled with care. Dummy artillery is positioned along ridges, and canvas soldiers are planted in realistic poses. The morning seems still, almost serene, but somewhere beyond the hills, a German reconnaissance patrol moves silently, its observers scanning the terrain. Every rustle of grass, every movement of rubber, every echo of a sound effect carries the potential to reveal the truth. One such close call occurred during an early operation in northern France. The team had set up a fake encampment along a ridge overlooking a river crossing. Inflatable tanks glimmered under the first light, and sound recordings of engine noise echoed softly through the valley. Everything appeared perfect. Then, a local farmer, curious and unaware of the ongoing deception, wandered onto the field. He tugged at one of the rubber tanks, causing it to sway unnaturally. A soldier, hidden nearby, rushed forward quietly, careful not to startle the man. He guided the farmer away, offering a plausible explanation, a maintenance exercise, a training drill. The incident passed without exposure, but it left the team with a vivid reminder. The line between success and failure was narrow, and vigilance had to be constant. Another tense moment came when German reconnaissance planes flew unexpectedly over a phantom brigade. The inflatables, arranged meticulously, cast shadows that could betray their artificial nature. The soundtracks had to be switched off temporarily to avoid revealing the limited number of men operating the deception. Soldiers scrambled, repositioning dummy tanks and adjusting the angles of artillery to maintain the illusion. Minutes stretched slowly, each one heavy with anticipation, until the planes moved on and the crisis passed. The Ghost Army had survived yet another close encounter, but the adrenaline and relief lingered quietly in the morning air. Weather, too, posed constant challenges. Rain could weigh down canvas soldiers, flatten inflatable tanks, and distort sound effects. Muddy fields could make tracks appear inconsistent, and strong winds could threaten the stability of the carefully positioned decoys. The men learned to adapt, reinforcing inflatables, adding weighted bases, and recalibrating sound systems to account for environmental changes. Each operation became a lesson in resilience, improvisation, and patience. Some near discoveries were almost comical in a quiet, human way. Soldiers reported German officers peering curiously at rubber tanks from the other side of a ridge, gesturing to their comrades as though something seemed unusual. The Ghost Army responded with subtle adjustments, changing the angle of a tank, repositioning a dummy soldier, or adding smoke from a simulated campfire to mask imperfections. These small, careful corrections preserved the illusion, turning potential disasters into understated triumphs. The psychological pressure was perhaps the heaviest burden of all. The men of the Ghost Army knew that exposure could endanger lives. If the Germans discovered that an entire division was a fabrication, real Allied units might be ambushed or delayed. The responsibility weighed silently on their shoulders, and yet they carried it with calm discipline. Long hours, careful planning, and meticulous attention to detail became a daily rhythm, and the knowledge that their work saved lives provided quiet reassurance. One particularly tense operation involved the creation of a phantom armored column to distract enemy forces from a real Allied advance. Inflatable tanks were arranged on a hilltop, sound recordings of engine noise echoed across the valley, and radio chatter mimicked the movement of hundreds of soldiers. Just as the team completed the setup, a German patrol emerged from a nearby forest. The soldiers froze, hearts pounding in the quiet of early morning. The patrol observed the scene for several minutes, as if trying to make sense of the unusual sight. Then, with cautious steps, the patrol moved on. The Ghost Army exhaled slowly, knowing how narrowly the deception had been preserved. These close calls taught invaluable lessons. The men learned to anticipate not only the actions of the enemy, but also the unpredictability of the natural world and the curiosity of civilians. They developed contingency plans, rehearsed rapid adjustments, and refined communication methods to coordinate changes quickly. Each near discovery became a quiet reminder that their mission depended on careful observation, flexibility, and ingenuity. In addition to environmental and human challenges, equipment failures posed ongoing risks. Air pumps for inflatables could malfunction, radios could misfire, and sound equipment could produce unintended distortions. Soldiers carried repair kits, spare parts, and backup devices, and they practiced troubleshooting under pressure. Even small technical failures required calm, deliberate responses to prevent the illusion from unraveling. The Ghost Army's ability to adapt to these challenges became a hallmark of their effectiveness. Despite the tension, there was also camaraderie and understated humor. Soldiers shared quiet jokes about the surreal nature of their work, inflating tanks in the dead of night, hiding from patrols, and carefully adjusting canvas soldiers as if they were actors in a play. These small moments of levity helped relieve stress and reinforced the bonds between team members in the quiet of a French valley, amidst rubber, canvas, and recordings of phantom armies. Human connection became a subtle but vital support. Some near discoveries were nearly catastrophic. During one operation, an unexpected artillery barrage threatened the inflated decoys. Soldiers rushed to reposition tanks, secure dummies, and mask the signs of the setup. The shells fell just outside the perimeter, and the illusion remained intact. But the adrenaline lingered. These experiences underscored the delicate balance between success and failure, and reinforced the need for meticulous planning at every stage. The lessons learned during these tense moments informed every subsequent operation. The Ghost Army became increasingly skilled at anticipating potential threats, adjusting strategies in real time, and creating redundancies in their deceptions. They studied enemy behavior, weather patterns, and terrain features with a meticulous eye, ensuring that every detail contributed to the overall illusion. The art of deception became a discipline, honed through experience, observation, and quiet reflection. Ultimately, the close calls and near discoveries revealed something profound about the nature of their mission. Victory was not measured by the destruction of enemy forces or the capture of territory, but by the preservation of life, the redirection of attention, and the maintenance of illusions. Each narrowly avoided exposure reinforced the importance of patience, creativity, and careful attention to detail. The Ghost Army's triumphs were subtle, quiet, and often invisible, yet they were no less significant for their understated nature. By the end of the war, the Ghost Army's experiences with close calls had shaped a unit that was extraordinarily resilient, adaptable, and disciplined. They had faced moments of extreme tension and navigated them with skill, creativity, and calm determination. Their ability to survive near discoveries, maintain their illusions, and continue operations under pressure became a defining feature of their legacy. And so, as we look back, we see that the Ghost Army's success was not only in the creation of phantom divisions, but in their capacity to endure uncertainty. In the quiet, mist-filled valleys, among inflatable tanks and dummy soldiers, they learned to navigate the fragile line between exposure and concealment. Each near discovery became a testament to their ingenuity, patience, and courage, qualities that, while subtle, contributed immeasurably to the broader success of the Allied effort. Chapter 7: The Human Side. Stories of the soldiers amid the rubber tanks, dummy soldiers, and soft echoes of recorded engines. The Ghost Army was more than just a collection of clever deceptions. It was a unit of real men, each with their own fears, dreams, and stories. To understand the full measure of their work, it is important to imagine not only the operations they executed, but also the quiet humanity that sustained them. Picture a young soldier, barely more than a boy, kneeling in a misty French field at dawn. His hands are cold as he adjusts the seams of an inflatable tank. Nearby, his comrades are hunched over canvas dummies, carefully arranging the angles of limbs and equipment so that, from a distance, they will appear as a real division. The morning is still, and the only sound is the soft hiss of rubber inflating and the gentle clink of metal tools. He pauses for a moment, taking in the quiet beauty of the countryside. Though he is far from home, and though war is all around him, in this moment, he feels a fragile calm. This calm was often punctuated by small acts of creativity and levity. Soldiers would sketch their surroundings in notebooks, capturing the mist over a hillside, the pattern of tracks in the mud, or the playful mischief of a dummy soldier propped in an amusing pose. Others wrote letters home, carefully avoiding the truth of their unusual mission, instead describing long marches, foggy mornings, and the quiet camaraderie of their unit. These letters were a lifeline, a reminder that despite the surreal nature of their work, they were connected to the world beyond the battlefield. Friendships grew quietly, nurtured in the subtle routines of daily life. Meals were shared in the soft glow of lanterns, laughter floated over improvised tables, and stories were exchanged in whispers beneath canvas tents. Some men had backgrounds in art, music, or advertising, and they brought with them a sense of imagination that found expression in unexpected ways. A painter might arrange dummy soldiers to cast shadows just so, while a sound engineer experimented with overlapping tracks to create the illusion of a larger presence. Every skill, no matter how unusual, became part of a collective effort. Despite the calm moments, there was also a persistent undercurrent of tension. The soldiers knew that discovery could have severe consequences. They learned to move silently, to anticipate the actions of the enemy, and to adapt quickly to unexpected situations. Each day required patience, observation, and careful planning. Yet, amid this tension, small gestures of kindness and humanity persisted. A shared cigarette, a quiet conversation about home, a fleeting smile. These moments reminded the men of what they were fighting for and provided comfort amid the strain of secrecy. One soldier recalled the surreal nature of his role. We would sit in a field, surrounded by what looked like an army, yet it was all rubber and canvas, and still, every day, we carried the weight of knowing that real lives depended on us remaining unseen. In these reflections, it becomes clear that the Ghost Army's work was not only about deception, but also about responsibility, a quiet, steady commitment to protecting others through ingenuity rather than brute force. The soldiers' creativity often extended beyond operational needs. They devised small rituals and routines to maintain morale, morning stretches, whispered jokes, and even impromptu sketches of the dummy soldiers' expressions helped bring lightness to their days. In the quiet of pre-dawn or twilight, when most of the world was asleep, these routines became small anchors of normalcy. Each act, no matter how simple, reinforced a sense of identity and camaraderie within the unusual structure of their unit. The Ghost Army was also a learning community. Men shared techniques, teaching each other how to inflate tanks efficiently, arrange dummies convincingly, or craft radio messages that could mislead an enemy division. They learned from mistakes, discussed the nuances of shadows and sound, and developed an almost instinctual understanding of the art of deception. In this collaborative environment, expertise was passed quietly from one soldier to another, strengthening the unit as a whole. Amid the deceptions and rehearsals, personal stories persisted. Some soldiers found solace in small hobbies, sketching, writing, poetry, or quietly playing a harmonica while waiting for dusk. Others reflected on the world they had left behind, families, hometowns, and ambitions now paused by the demands of war. These personal moments were not distractions, but vital threads that wove resilience into the fabric of their daily lives. Even the physical act of work carried a sense of ritual and reflection. Inflating tanks, arranging dummy artillery, and testing soundtracks required focus, patience, and care. Each task became a quiet meditation, a repetitive rhythm that grounded the soldiers and allowed them to feel control over a chaotic world. The act of creating illusions, paradoxically, brought stability to their own experiences of uncertainty. Despite their secrecy, some soldiers formed bonds with local civilians. Farmers, shopkeepers, and villagers occasionally glimpsed the unusual scenes, and interactions were carefully navigated. Soldiers learned to explain exercises plausibly, sometimes offering a small smile or nod to ease curiosity. These fleeting human connections, though brief, reinforced the idea that their work, while hidden, existed within a larger tapestry of life and community. Letters home often captured these moments, albeit indirectly. Descriptions of foggy mornings, gentle streams, and the quiet rhythm of the countryside conveyed both beauty and solace. Soldiers spoke of camaraderie and the small victories of successful deception, though always in careful terms to avoid revealing operational details. These letters became a bridge between the surreal world of the Ghost Army and the familiar world they longed to return to. One recurring reflection among soldiers was the strangeness of their dual existence. By day, they were meticulous engineers of illusion, arranging tanks and crafting radio signals. By night, they were ordinary young men, laughing quietly, writing letters, or sharing stories of home. This juxtaposition of extraordinary duty and ordinary humanity defined much of their experience. They were performers on a vast, invisible stage, yet they carried the hopes, fears, and dreams common to all who face uncertainty and danger. In quieter moments, soldiers also reflected on the moral dimension of their work. Unlike traditional combat, where destruction was tangible and visible, the Ghost Army's victories were subtle, almost intangible. They saved lives without shedding blood, protected divisions without confrontation, and shaped outcomes through deception. This unusual form of contribution brought a profound sense of purpose. Success was measured not in enemy casualties but in the preservation of human life, an extraordinary achievement quietly acknowledged only within the unit. Over time, these experiences left a lasting mark. Many soldiers returned home changed, carrying memories that were vivid yet almost invisible to the wider world. The surreal combination of artistry and warfare, tension and calm, secrecy and responsibility created a perspective that few others could understand. Their stories, shared privately for decades, eventually revealed the human heart of the Ghost Army, a unit defined not only by clever tricks, but by quiet courage, empathy, and imagination. As you imagine the soldiers in the fields of France and Germany, take a moment to see them not as distant historical figures, but as real people, breathing softly in the early morning mist, adjusting an inflatable tank, whispering a joke to a comrade, writing a letter home. In these moments, the vast machinery of war is tempered by human presence, by creativity, and by the unassuming heroism of ordinary men performing extraordinary acts. And so, in this chapter, we see that the Ghost Army was more than its techniques or operations. It was a community, a collection of individuals who found calm, courage, and connection amidst secrecy and tension. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, quiet, gentle, and enduring, even in the most unusual and surreal circumstances. Chapter 8: Legends in the Mist. Tales of Creative Ingenuity, the Ghost. Army was not only a unit of deception, but a laboratory of imagination. Each operation was a canvas, every field a stage, and each inflatable tank, dummy soldier, and recorded engine a brushstroke in a grand, invisible masterpiece. What made their story remarkable was not merely the scale of their illusions, but the extraordinary creativity that turned simple materials into instruments of strategy as we drift gently through the mists of history. Imagine the ingenuity that transformed rubber, canvas, and sound into lifelike forces capable of reshaping entire campaigns. Picture a quiet valley at dawn, where morning fog hangs over rolling hills like a soft veil. Inflatable tanks rest quietly on the ground, partially hidden by the mist. Canvas soldiers stand in their positions, silent and still, yet perfectly poised to deceive the eyes of an observer. Somewhere nearby, a sound engineer adjusts the playback of engine noises, ensuring that the rhythm of the motors mimics hundreds of vehicles moving across the terrain. Every detail is deliberate, every element carefully orchestrated to create the impression of a reality that does not exist. One of the most inventive elements of their work was the use of perspective. The Ghost Army understood that an illusion was only as strong as the observer's viewpoint. Tanks, when viewed from a distance, could appear massive and fully manned, while in reality they were lightweight, inflatable decoys. Dummy soldiers were positioned in clusters, with slight variations in posture and spacing, to suggest large formations. Shadows, carefully calculated and adjusted, added depth and realism. Even the positioning of smoke from simulated fires was designed to trick the eye into believing in the presence of activity where there was none. Sound, too, became an instrument of creativity. The engineers developed complex layering techniques, combining recordings of engines, marching feet, artillery, and distant voices to simulate vast armies. By manipulating volume, echo, and timing, they created the impression of movement across terrain. An observer might hear a convoy of tanks approaching, with artillery firing in the distance, while in reality only a handful of men operated a few sound devices. The result was a landscape of perception, where imagination and reality intertwined seamlessly. Some of the most imaginative tactics were almost theatrical in nature. Soldiers would create entire phantom units, complete with tents, supply wagons, and dummy artillery. Campfires were simulated with lanterns and smoke generators, and laundry lines were strung across empty tents, suggesting the quiet routines of soldiers at rest. Even small touches, like the angle of a tent flap or the placement of a water barrel, could enhance the illusion. The attention to detail was meticulous, as though every element were part of an elaborate stage production designed to fool not an audience in a theater, but an enemy observing from miles away. One memorable story involved a decoy operation designed to mimic an advancing armored division. Inflatable tanks were arranged along a ridge, their outlines softened by morning mist. Canvas soldiers were posed as if marching into formation. Meanwhile, sound engineers played recordings of engines and marching troops, carefully timed to suggest realistic movement. German reconnaissance units, observing from a distance, reported the presence of an entire division. The deception was so effective that real enemy units were redeployed to respond to the phantom threat, leaving the actual Allied forces free to advance with minimal opposition. The Ghost Army's creativity was not limited to visual and auditory illusions. They also explored psychological tactics, anticipating how enemy commanders would interpret information. Radio operators crafted messages that mimicked the patterns, language, and timing of real divisions. They used deliberate inconsistencies and small details to reinforce the perception of realism, such as having dummy units report minor incidents or maintain routine communications. Every decision was calculated to shape the enemy's expectations, drawing their focus away from the true movements of Allied forces. In some operations, ingenuity took even more imaginative forms. Inflatable tanks were disguised as natural terrain features when observed from certain angles. Canvas soldiers were positioned alongside real objects, like carts or barrels, to create the illusion of weight and activity. Soundtracks were played with subtle variations to suggest depth and distance, giving the impression that multiple divisions were operating simultaneously. These creative touches transformed simple materials into instruments of strategic deception, turning the battlefield into a canvas of perception. The men themselves were the heart of this ingenuity. Many had backgrounds in art, theatre, music, and design. Their skills, often seemingly unrelated to warfare, became essential to the success of operations. A painter's eye ensured that shadows and proportions were convincing. A stage designer's sense of space allowed decoys to be arranged naturally. A sound engineer's understanding of acoustics created auditory illusions that could fool even trained ears. By blending artistic sensibilities with military strategy, the Ghost Army elevated deception to an extraordinary art form. Imagination extended to problem-solving under pressure. When inflatables were damaged by wind or artillery, soldiers improvised repairs using tape, ropes, and canvas patches. When radio equipment malfunctioned, operators quickly rerouted transmissions to maintain the illusion. When unexpected observers appeared, the team adapted in real time, repositioning decoys, adjusting sounds, and creating new cues to sustain the deception. These moments of ingenuity required calm thinking, rapid creativity, and a deep understanding of both materials and human perception. One particularly inventive operation involved creating the illusion of movement across a valley. Inflatable tanks were placed at intervals along a winding path, with sound recordings timed to suggest vehicles rolling down a road. Canvas soldiers were posed as if marching alongside, and smoke generators added the impression of campfires and activity. From a distance, it appeared that an entire armored column was advancing, when in reality only a small team of soldiers managed the entire scene. The operation successfully misdirected enemy forces, demonstrating that imagination, properly applied, could reshape the perception of reality itself. Creativity also thrived in the quieter moments. Soldiers would experiment with angles, distances, and layering techniques, often using humor and playfulness to test the limits of their illusions. A dummy soldier might be posed in a humorous stance to see if an observer would notice, or a small decoy tank might be placed in an unexpected location to test perception. These experiments were not frivolous. They were practical exercises that deepened understanding and improved the effectiveness of future operations. Through all of this, a key lesson emerged. Ingenuity was as powerful as brute force. In a world dominated by machines, weapons, and strategy, the Ghost Army showed that human creativity, attention to detail, and imagination could achieve results that armies of men and tanks alone could not. Theirs was a quiet kind of heroism, defined not by physical strength, but by the ability to envision possibilities and bring them to life. As we drift gently through this chapter, picture the misty fields of Europe, where inflatable tanks stand like silent guardians. Canvas soldiers watch the horizon, and recorded engines hum softly in the distance. See the men of the Ghost Army moving quietly among them, adjusting, observing, and creating a reality that exists only in the perceptions of others. Their work is subtle, almost invisible, yet it shapes history in profound ways. And so, in this chapter, we remember the Ghost Army not only for the battles they influenced, but for the boundless creativity, imagination, and ingenuity that defined their mission. Their story reminds us that even in the gravest circumstances, the human mind can invent, adapt, and transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. It is a legacy of quiet brilliance, hidden in the mist, waiting to be appreciated by those who take the time to see beyond what is immediately visible. Chapter 9. The Long Shadows. Enduring legacy. As the war drew to a close and the sounds of battle faded across the European landscape, the Ghost Army quietly began to dismantle its illusions. Inflatable tanks were deflated, canvas soldiers carefully folded, and sound equipment packed away. The valleys and fields that had once echoed with the hum of imagined engines returned to an almost perfect stillness. Mist rolled over the hills as if washing away the evidence of their ingenious work, leaving only a memory that few would know and even fewer would fully understand. But the impact of the Ghost Army did not vanish with their equipment. Though invisible to most, their contributions cast long shadows over the course of history. Divisions were misled, enemy forces were redirected, and countless lives were spared, all because a small group of men had combined art, technology, and imagination in ways the world had never seen before. Their victories were subtle, uncelebrated, yet profoundly important. Imagine walking through a quiet European town decades later, past the gentle slopes and fields that once hosted phantom armies. The land seems peaceful, ordinary, yet beneath that calm lies a hidden story of creativity and courage. Where once rubber tanks and canvas soldiers had stood, only shadows of memory remain. The townsfolk, unaware of the extraordinary events that took place on their soil, continue their lives in the quiet rhythm of everyday existence. And yet, those who served in the Ghost Army carry these memories, indelible, invisible, and enduring. The enduring legacy of the Ghost Army is also a story of revelation and recognition. For decades after the war, their missions remained classified, tucked away in government files and whispered only among those who served. The broader public had no knowledge of the phantom divisions, the inflatable tanks, or the carefully orchestrated soundscapes that had reshaped battlefields. But slowly, as records were declassified and histories were written, the extraordinary story emerged. People learned that victory sometimes came not through bullets and bombs, but through imagination, patience, and ingenuity. The soldiers themselves often reflected on the paradox of their legacy. They had participated in monumental operations that influenced the course of war, yet their contributions were invisible to most. They had saved lives without fighting conventional battles, yet their acts of courage were quiet and unsung. This duality, profound impact paired with hidden recognition, became a defining feature of their experience. Many returned home without medals or fanfare, carrying only the knowledge that their ingenuity had made a tangible difference in the world. Some of the Ghost Army veterans later spoke about the ways their wartime experiences shaped the rest of their lives. The skills they developed, creativity, problem-solving, adaptability, and collaboration, became valuable in peacetime pursuits. Artists, designers, engineers found that the lessons learned in the field translated seamlessly into civilian life. The ability to envision possibilities, to see connections where others might see only obstacles, and to remain calm under pressure became hallmarks of their post-war endeavors. The psychological legacy of their work is equally remarkable. The Ghost Army demonstrated that perception can be as powerful as reality. By carefully shaping what the enemy could see, hear, and believe, they influenced outcomes in ways that traditional military force could not. This principle, quietly embedded in their operations, has influenced military strategy and deception practices ever since. The story of inflatable tanks and phantom divisions is now studied as an early example of psychological operations. a testament to the enduring value of creative thinking in high-stakes situations. Even in popular culture, the Ghost Army has gradually gained recognition. Documentaries, books, and articles have explored their story, highlighting both the surreal nature of their operations and the remarkable creativity of the men involved. These accounts emphasize not only the tactical brilliance of the unit, but also the human stories, the friendships, the quiet courage, and the imaginative ingenuity that defined their mission. By sharing these narratives, the legacy of the Ghost Army continues to inspire new generations, reminding us that history is often shaped by those who act with vision and subtlety. The landscapes they once occupied, now peaceful and serene, bear the faintest traces of their presence in memory. Rolling hills, quiet valleys, and mist-shrouded fields once staged scenes of elaborate deception. Today, these sites offer a different kind of reflection, a reminder of how human creativity can shape reality in profound ways. Visitors, historians, and veterans alike can walk through these spaces, imagining the phantom armies that once moved silently across them, guided by ingenuity rather than force. An enduring lesson of the Ghost Army is the quiet power of collaboration. The unit was composed of men with diverse talents: artists, designers, engineers, sound specialists, and soldiers. Each brought a unique perspective, and each contribution was vital to the success of operations. Together, they created illusions that were convincing, adaptable, and strategically effective. This collaborative spirit, combined with imagination and meticulous attention to detail, offers a timeless example of what can be achieved when individuals work together with focus, trust, and creativity. Another legacy lies in the concept of restraint and subtlety. Unlike traditional battlefield heroics, the Ghost Army operated in a manner that minimized direct confrontation and risk. They achieved results through careful planning, patience, and psychological insight. Their victories were measured not by destruction but by preservation of human life, of resources, and of strategic advantage. In a world often captivated by overt displays of force, the Ghost Army reminds us that subtlety and imagination can be equally powerful. As we reflect gently on this chapter, imagine the veterans, years later, sitting quietly in their homes, recalling foggy fields, rubber tanks, and the hush of pre-dawn operations. Some sketch memories, some write letters, and some simply recall in silence. They carry within them the knowledge that their efforts shaped history in ways invisible to the eye, that the rhythms of imagination and ingenuity had tangible impact, and that their quiet dedication had preserved life and influenced outcomes in profound ways. The legacy of the Ghost Army also extends to the broader understanding of war and human ingenuity. It challenges the assumption that victory is only achieved through force, highlighting the importance of perception, creativity, and collaboration. It offers a subtle lesson that the mind, guided by careful observation, patience, and artistic sensibility, can achieve remarkable outcomes even in the most extreme circumstances. Even today, decades after the last operations, the story of the Ghost Army resonates. It inspires military strategists, artists, and students alike, offering a quiet but powerful reminder that imagination is a force to be reckoned with. The fields of France and Germany, once staged with phantom armies, now provide a backdrop for reflection, understanding, and appreciation of the ingenuity that quietly altered the course of history. And so, as this chapter drifts to its close, we see that the long shadows cast by the Ghost Army are not of destruction or devastation, but of creativity, courage, and subtle brilliance. Their story is one of understated heroism, of quiet acts that shaped the world, and of human ingenuity applied with patience, precision, and care. In remembering them, we honor not only their skill and bravery, but also the enduring power of imagination, collaboration, and the subtle art of making the invisible profoundly impactful. Chapter 10: Unveiling the Phantom, Declassification and Recognition. For decades after the Second World War, the story of the Ghost Army remained a closely guarded secret. The men who had labored in foggy fields, inflating rubber tanks, adjusting canvas soldiers, and orchestrating phantom divisions could speak of their experiences only in whispers, often to family members or trusted friends. Their operations were classified, tucked away in government archives, invisible to historians and the public alike. Yet, the impact of their work, though hidden, had been profound, shaping battles, redirecting enemy forces, and preserving lives. Imagine a dusty archive room, shelves lined with folders marked by dates, codes, and careful annotations. Within these folders lay plans, reports, photographs, and personal accounts of phantom units that had roamed valleys and hills across Europe. For years, these documents rested quietly, almost forgotten, until the 1990s, when the US Army began to slowly declassify records of the Ghost Army's operations. What emerged was a narrative both surreal and inspiring, a tale of human ingenuity, creativity, and understated heroism that had remained invisible for nearly half a century. The first public accounts were met with a mixture of astonishment and admiration. Readers and viewers alike were fascinated by the sheer inventiveness of the operations. Inflatable tanks that could fool reconnaissance units, dummy soldiers posed in convincing formations, and soundtracks carefully engineered to mimic the movements of entire divisions, all of it challenged conventional notions of warfare. People were captivated by the notion that a relatively small group of men, armed with creativity rather than sheer firepower, had altered the course of military engagements. Yet, as the story was revealed, the human element emerged as the most compelling. Veterans recounted their experiences with a gentle humor, reflecting on the surreal moments that had defined their service. One recalled adjusting a rubber tank in the pre-dawn mist, only to hear a nearby soldier whisper, "If this works, we've just fooled an entire division with a piece of inflatable rubber." Another described how a canvas soldier was inadvertently propped in a comical pose, prompting quiet laughter among the team, even as the illusion remained intact for enemy observers. These personal reflections illuminated the ingenuity and resourcefulness of the men involved, revealing that their work was both highly skilled and humanly relatable. As records became public, historians began to study the operations in detail. Military scholars examined photographs of inflated tanks casting long shadows across hillsides, analyzed sound recordings used to simulate armored columns, and read operational reports that meticulously described the placement of dummy soldiers. These studies revealed the careful planning, creativity, and technical skill that had made the Ghost Army's deceptions effective. It became clear that their success was not accidental. It was the product of deliberate thought, collaboration, and relentless attention to detail. The declassification also sparked recognition within military circles. Leaders and strategists began to appreciate the innovative approach to psychological warfare, noting that the Ghost Army had demonstrated a unique blend of creativity, discipline, and strategic foresight. They had shown that influencing perception could be as decisive as conventional combat, and that deception, when executed with precision, could achieve results without the cost of bloodshed. In a quiet, almost invisible way, the Ghost Army had rewritten what it meant to achieve victory on the battlefield. For the veterans themselves, declassification brought a profound, if understated, sense of validation. Many had returned home after the war with no medals, no public acknowledgement, only memories of surreal fields and quiet operations. Now, decades later, their contributions were acknowledged, their stories told, and their ingenuity celebrated. Some veterans attended public ceremonies or spoke at conferences, sharing first-hand accounts of the work that had remained hidden for so long. The long shadows of their secret operations were finally illuminated, allowing the world to appreciate the scale and brilliance of their achievements. Photographs released to the public revealed scenes that seemed almost fantastical. Inflatable tanks lined up along ridges, canvas soldiers arranged in lifelike formations, and engineers quietly adjusting sound equipment in foggy fields, all captured the surreal reality of the operations. These images, when viewed together, conveyed both the technical sophistication of the Ghost Army and the human ingenuity that animated every detail. Viewers marveled not only at the cleverness of the deceptions, but also at the calm, disciplined effort that made them possible. Documentaries, books, and exhibitions further extended recognition. Filmmakers recreated operations with soft, immersive imagery, allowing audiences to imagine the mist-shrouded valleys and phantom units. Authors explored both tactical and human dimensions, highlighting the creativity, patience, and quiet heroism of the soldiers. Museums included sections dedicated to the Ghost Army, displaying photographs, sound recordings, and even surviving equipment, allowing the public to connect tangibly with a history that had been hidden for so long. The story also sparked a broader reflection on the nature of warfare and ingenuity. It challenged assumptions about what constitutes heroism and valor, demonstrating that victory could be achieved through intellect, imagination, and subtlety rather than brute force alone. The Ghost Army became a symbol of the unrecognized and often invisible contributions that shape history, a reminder that impact is not always measured in dramatic action, but sometimes in quiet, thoughtful, and meticulously executed strategy. Even today, the legacy of the Ghost Army continues to inspire. Military units study their techniques to understand deception and psychological operations. Artists and designers draw inspiration from their ingenuity and problem-solving. Students and historians explore the story as an example of how human creativity can shape outcomes in unexpected ways. The men who once inflated tanks and positioned canvas soldiers have become enduring figures in a narrative of innovation, resilience, and subtle heroism. As you imagine this chapter in your mind, picture the veterans, now older, reflecting quietly on their contributions. The valleys and fields where they once operated are serene, the mist soft on the hills, and yet their ingenuity echoes in history. They walk through memory, recalling surreal mornings, whispered jokes, and meticulous planning. Their work, once invisible, is now honored not for spectacle, but for the profound intelligence, creativity, and courage it represents. And so, in Chapter 10, we recognize the Ghost Army not only for their clever tactics, but for the enduring power of imagination applied to real-world challenges. Declassification allowed the world to see what had been hidden, to appreciate what had been invisible, and to honor the men whose creativity quietly reshaped the battlefield. Their legacy is one of subtle brilliance, human ingenuity, and the quiet art of making the impossible seem real. Chapter 11. The Unsung Heroes, Personal Reflections and Memories. Even after the Phantom Army's operations became public knowledge, much of its story remained in the quiet corners of memory, held by the men who lived it. These were not generals with medals adorning their chests, nor were they celebrated in newspapers or on victory banners. They were ordinary men, each with unique talents and backgrounds, who became extraordinary through their ingenuity and courage. In this chapter, we drift gently into the personal reflections and memories of these unsung heroes, imagining the human moments behind the grand deceptions. Picture an artist, still holding a sketchbook decades later, recalling fog-laden mornings on a French hillside. He remembers the soft hiss of inflating tanks, the way the mist softened shadows and gave rubber vehicles a strange, lifelike presence. He recalls kneeling in the damp grass, adjusting scenes and observing the landscape, feeling a delicate balance between fear and exhilaration. Every detail mattered, every decision carried weight, yet the moments also held quiet beauty. In these recollections, the war was not just a matter of strategy, but a canvas of subtle textures, rhythms, and perceptions. A sound engineer who had spent days layering engine noises and distant artillery to simulate phantom divisions, later described his work as a kind of delicate orchestration. He spoke of how he would adjust volume levels with painstaking care, ensuring that the illusion of hundreds of tanks rolling across a valley could be felt, even if not seen. There was a meditative quality to these hours, a quiet focus that grounded him in the midst of chaos. He recalled the satisfaction of hearing reports from reconnaissance that the deception had worked. A soft triumph, almost invisible to anyone outside the operation. Letters and diaries from soldiers offer further glimpses into their inner lives. They wrote not only of operational details, which had to remain vague, but also of small personal rituals that sustained them. Some would rise before dawn to sketch the fog-draped countryside, capturing the way light filtered through trees and reflected off wet earth. Others wrote poetry or played musical instruments during quiet moments, finding solace in creativity and reflection. In these simple acts, the soldiers nurtured a sense of humanity and normalcy amidst an environment defined by secrecy and tension. Friendship, too, emerges as a central theme. The Ghost Army was a community built on trust, mutual respect, and shared purpose. Soldiers supported one another through long hours in the cold and fog, through the pressure of maintaining perfection in every illusion. Humor was quietly essential. Whispered jokes over morning coffee, playful arrangements of dummy soldiers, and subtle pranks that lightened the mood without compromising operations. These bonds, forged in the tension of secrecy and ingenuity, endured long after the war ended, forming connections that were often stronger than those created under more conventional circumstances. Some memories are tinged with a surreal sense of wonder. Veterans recalled how, on misty mornings, inflated tanks and canvas soldiers would appear almost lifelike from a distance, as if animated by an unseen force. The illusion was so convincing that even those operating nearby occasionally experienced fleeting moments of disbelief. Sometimes it felt as if we were walking among ghosts, one soldier later said. These moments, strange and enchanting, left a lasting imprint on the imagination, blending the line between reality and art. Yet, alongside the wonder, there was a quiet awareness of risk. The soldiers understood that discovery by the enemy could carry serious consequences. They moved carefully, observed intently, and adapted quickly to unforeseen events. Each mission required calm, focus, patience, and precision. In these moments, courage was subtle rather than dramatic. It was expressed through careful preparation, unwavering attention to detail, and the quiet endurance of long hours in cold, foggy fields. Family memories also reveal the human side of the soldiers. Children remember fathers returning home with faint smudges of grease on their hands or a sketch tucked into a coat pocket, evidence of creative labor that had never been fully explained. Spouses recall quiet evenings filled with letters, sketches, and soft stories, fragments of a world that had remained largely hidden. These personal memories, though often understated, conveyed the profound impact of service that was largely invisible to the wider world. Some veterans later reflected on the paradox of their contributions. Their work was critical, saving lives and shaping military outcomes, yet it was almost entirely unrecognized during their lifetimes. They had not fired weapons in conventional battle, and their heroism was quiet, subtle, and intangible. Yet, the satisfaction of knowing that lives were preserved, that strategies were altered, and that the enemy was misled, brought a deep and enduring sense of fulfillment. Recognition, though delayed, was only a complement to the quiet pride already carried in their hearts. The soldiers also described the interplay of artistry and strategy that defined their work. Artists, engineers, and sound specialists applied skills that might have seemed unrelated to combat, yet they were central to the effectiveness of operations. The careful arrangement of canvas soldiers, the layering of soundtracks, and the subtle positioning of inflatable tanks required both imagination and discipline. These reflections reveal that ingenuity and artistry, applied with intention, can shape outcomes in ways that brute force alone cannot. Memory, for these men, was often interwoven with the landscape. Rolling hills, misty valleys, and quiet fields held vivid recollections of operations. From the meticulous placement of decoys to the gentle hum of simulated engines. Even decades later, a quiet stroll through a countryside could evoke memories of long mornings, the soft rustle of canvas in the wind, and the delicate balance between imagination and reality. The land itself became a repository for personal history, preserving traces of invisible operations and unseen courage. Many veterans also spoke of the emotional resonance of secrecy. Keeping their missions hidden was a heavy responsibility, yet it fostered a sense of closeness and trust within the unit. The shared knowledge of what had been accomplished, unseen by the world, created bonds that endured long after the war. These unspoken stories formed a quiet legacy, a network of understanding and respect among those who had lived it firsthand. As we drift gently through these reflections, imagine the veterans in quiet moments, an artist sketching the contours of a hill, a sound engineer adjusting a tape deck, a soldier quietly observing a dummy formation. They moved deliberately, carefully, immersed in the rhythm of their work and the subtleties of perception. Their focus, patience, and creativity become almost meditative, a gentle cadence that contrasts with the broader chaos of the war around them. Even their humor is gentle, almost imperceptible, yet revealing of character. Stories of canvas soldiers posed in amusing ways, of playful adjustments to dummy tanks, and of whispered jokes during long operations illustrate the humanity at the heart of their mission. These small moments of levity allowed the men to endure stress, maintain morale, and preserve their own sense of normalcy amidst a surreal and demanding environment. In reflecting on personal memories, it becomes clear that the Ghost Army was not only a story of tactical brilliance but also of human endurance. It was about ordinary men performing extraordinary acts, using imagination and skill to protect others and shape outcomes in ways invisible to most. Their quiet courage, attention to detail, and subtle ingenuity form a legacy that continues to inspire, offering a profound lesson on the enduring value of creativity, collaboration, and calm determination. As this chapter gently concludes, envision the men, now decades older, still carrying these memories with them. The fields where phantom tanks once rolled, the valleys shrouded in mist, and the soundscapes that had fooled entire divisions remain vivid in their minds. These personal reflections are a testament not only to their ingenuity and skill, but also to the quiet heroism and humanity that defined their service. In honoring them, we honor a story of subtle brilliance, enduring legacy, and the gentle power of imagination applied to the most extraordinary circumstances. Chapter 12 Epilogue. Lessons from the Ghost Army. As we arrive at the final chapter of this long journey, it is time to step back gently and reflect on the story of the Ghost Army, not just as a military operation, but as a testament to imagination, ingenuity, and the quiet courage of ordinary men performing extraordinary acts. The rolling hills, misty valleys, and silent fields where phantom divisions once appeared are now peaceful landscapes, yet the echoes of their creativity linger, subtle and enduring. The Ghost Army teaches us that victory is not always defined by force. In a world obsessed with power, guns, and conventional strategy, these men showed that perception can be as influential as reality. By carefully shaping what the enemy could see and hear, they altered outcomes in profound ways. A single inflated tank placed at precisely the right angle, a carefully timed engine recording, or a canvas soldier positioned in a convincing stance could mislead entire divisions. Their work was subtle, almost invisible, yet its impact was enormous. Picture the soldiers quietly at work, each morning unfolding with deliberate calm, inflatable tanks hissing to life, canvas soldiers arranged in meticulous formations, and sound devices humming softly in the mist. Each action, however small, was part of a larger tapestry, a carefully orchestrated illusion that required patience, focus, and creativity. There was a rhythm to their days, a gentle cadence that balanced tension with quiet reflection, discipline with artistry. The Ghost Army reminds us that subtlety and thoughtfulness can be as powerful as bold, dramatic action. Another lesson emerges from their collaboration. The Ghost Army was not composed solely of soldiers trained in conventional warfare. Artists, designers, engineers, and sound specialists brought their unique talents, blending artistic sensibilities with strategic insight. Each skill was vital, each contribution indispensable. Their success illustrates the profound value of teamwork, of diverse minds working together toward a common goal. It is a reminder that collaboration, respect for individual skills, and trust in one another can produce outcomes far greater than any single effort alone. The personal stories of these men offer additional lessons. Even in extreme circumstances, they found moments of humor, beauty, and humanity, sketching misty landscapes, writing poetry, and quietly joking among comrades allowed them to endure long hours in challenging conditions. These small acts of self-expression remind us that resilience often lies not only in physical endurance, but also in maintaining one's sense of wonder, curiosity, and creativity even amid chaos. We also learn from the careful balance of secrecy and responsibility. The Ghost Army operated under strict confidentiality, understanding that exposure could compromise their missions. Yet, within that constraint, they exercised remarkable freedom to innovate, adapt, and experiment. Their work demonstrates the importance of discretion paired with creativity, showing that constraints can foster ingenuity rather than stifle it. This principle resonates far beyond the battlefield, applying to problem-solving, art, leadership, and daily life. The declassification of their operations in the 1990s offers another gentle lesson. Recognition, though delayed, eventually honored their ingenuity and courage. For decades, the heroes of the Ghost Army worked in quiet anonymity, their achievements uncelebrated, their sacrifices unseen. Yet when the world finally learned of their deeds, admiration and appreciation poured in. This reminds us that sometimes the true value of our actions is not immediately visible, and that patience, perseverance, and humility often accompany the most meaningful contributions. As we drift further into reflection, consider the psychological brilliance of their work. The Ghost Army illustrates that influencing perception can be as decisive as direct action, in life as in warfare. How others interpret reality shapes outcomes. The soldiers understood this deeply, applying their knowledge with patience, precision, and imagination. This insight, simple yet profound, extends to countless areas of life, teaching us to consider perspective, anticipate perception, and act thoughtfully. Creativity, perhaps the most enduring lesson, shines brightly throughout the Ghost Army's story. Ordinary materials, rubber, canvas, and sound devices became instruments of extraordinary effect. Every element was carefully designed, positioned, and timed, turning simple objects into tools of strategic mastery. This gentle reminder of human inventiveness encourages us to see possibility where others see limitation, to explore solutions with curiosity and imagination, and to trust that ingenuity often lies hidden within what seems ordinary. The Ghost Army also exemplifies quiet heroism. Their courage was not dramatic or public. It was subtle, deliberate, and often invisible. It existed in the calm endurance of long hours, the meticulous execution of detailed plans, and the unwavering focus on preserving life and shaping outcomes. These acts remind us that heroism need not be loud or recognized. Sometimes the most profound impact is made in ways that escape the spotlight, leaving only gentle ripples across history. As the story settles softly into memory, it is also a story of reflection. The landscapes they once occupied, hills, valleys, and misty fields, are now serene. Yet the imagination that once animated them endures in our minds. We can picture the soldiers at work, the gentle hiss of inflatables, the soft hum of engines, and the deliberate arrangement of dummy soldiers. Through reflection, we connect with their creativity, their courage, and their humanity, carrying the lessons forward into our own quiet, thoughtful lives. Finally, the Ghost Army reminds us of the enduring power of subtlety, patience, and vision. In a world that often values speed, visibility, and loud triumphs, these men demonstrate that profound impact can arise from careful, quiet effort. Their story encourages us to honor the unseen, to value imagination, and to recognize that influence is often gentle, deliberate, and enduring. As we close this chapter and this journey, picture the soldiers walking away from misty fields, leaving behind invisible traces of ingenuity and courage. Imagine their quiet smiles, the satisfaction of work well done, and the enduring legacy they have imparted to the world. Their story rests not in dramatic headlines, but in subtle ripples of human creativity, strategic brilliance, and quiet heroism. May this gentle reflection stay with you, reminding you that imagination, collaboration, patience, and subtle courage can leave a lasting mark on history and on the world around you. And now, as the evening settles and the mist rises over hills of memory, let your mind drift softly, carrying the lessons of the Ghost Army into the calm rhythms of your own rest. Chapter 13, Secrets Uncovered for Decades. The story of the Ghost Army lay hidden, tucked away in government files, secret reports, and the quiet memories of the men who had lived it. These were not stories of dramatic battlefields or celebrated heroics. They were subtle, ingenious acts of deception, quietly reshaping history. And yet, for more than 40 years after the war, the world remained unaware. The men who had inflated tanks, arranged canvas soldiers, and carefully orchestrated phantom divisions carried their experiences silently, bound by secrecy and duty. Imagine a dimly lit archive room, rows of metal shelves stretching into shadow, each folder marked with cryptic labels and dates. In these folders rested decades of untold operations, meticulous planning, photographs, and notes that described a war waged not with bullets but with creativity. For years, these documents were sealed, invisible to historians, students, or the general public. They lay quietly, waiting for the moment when their stories could finally emerge. That moment arrived in the 1990s, when the US Army began the careful process of declassifying records of the Ghost Army. The slow opening of these archives revealed a world both extraordinary and gentle, a world in which artistry, imagination, and careful planning shaped the outcomes of military campaigns. Historians, scholars, and curious minds were suddenly invited into a secret universe, where inflated rubber tanks and canvas soldiers had moved silently through misty valleys, deceiving enemy forces and saving countless lives. As the records became public, the first glimpses were almost surreal. Photographs showed lifelike formations of dummy soldiers, casting long, delicate shadows across rolling hills. Sound recordings captured the hum of phantom engines, the footsteps of invisible troops, and distant artillery that had never truly existed. The complexity and precision of these operations astounded observers, revealing a level of ingenuity that few could have imagined. Yet even as the world marveled, the human stories began to surface, quiet tales of resilience, humor, and creativity that had remained hidden for decades. Veterans, now older, were finally able to speak openly about their experiences. Many did so with a gentle humility, recalling the surreal beauty of mist-shrouded fields, the soft hiss of inflating tanks, and the delicate placement of canvas soldiers. They shared memories of long hours, careful coordination, and whispered jokes among comrades, moments that balanced the tension of secrecy with quiet joy. These reflections revealed not only the technical brilliance of their operations, but also the humanity at the heart of the Ghost Army. Letters, diaries, and interviews painted a picture of men who were deeply aware of the responsibility they carried. Each decision mattered, each placement of a phantom tank or sound effect could influence the course of a mission, yet amidst the precision and focus, they found moments of levity, subtle, quiet humor that lightened the work and forged bonds among the team. They recalled afternoons when canvas soldiers were positioned in amusing poses, or mornings when sound devices produced unexpected effects, prompting laughter that was hushed but heartfelt. The process of declassification also allowed the world to recognize the impact of these operations. Scholars studied the effectiveness of the Ghost Army, analyzing reports that documented how German forces had been misled, diverted, and confused. These operations, though almost invisible to the broader war efforts, had real consequences, shaping strategies and preserving lives. The story revealed that influence could be exercised not through force, but through perception, ingenuity, and creativity, a subtle yet profound lesson for generations to come. For the veterans themselves, the revelation brought a mixture of emotions. Some felt relief that their contributions were finally acknowledged. Others experienced nostalgia for the quiet intensity of the operations, the camaraderie, and the surreal beauty of their tasks. Many reflected on the paradox of their service. Acts that were invisible at the time now recognized decades later. Achievements that had quietly altered history without the glare of public attention. In this way, the Ghost Army became a story of patience, endurance, and the enduring power of quiet dedication. The public response was one of awe and admiration, Documentaries, books, and exhibitions brought the Ghost Army to life for new audiences, combining photographs, sound recordings, and personal accounts to create immersive experiences. Viewers were invited to imagine foggy European valleys, phantom armies moving silently, and the careful orchestration of operations that had seemed almost magical. Through these retellings, the Ghost Army transformed from a hidden chapter of history into an enduring symbol of creativity, intelligence, and subtle heroism. Even now, the declassified documents continue to offer new insights. Every photograph, report, and personal account adds a layer of depth to our understanding of the operations. Historians study them to explore the innovative strategies. Artists examine them for creative inspiration, and the general public is drawn into a story that balances ingenuity with human warmth. The unveiling of these secrets reminds us that history often holds layers waiting patiently to be discovered, and that the quiet contributions of individuals can leave lasting impressions long before the world takes notice. As you drift gently through this chapter, picture the veterans reading their own old reports, seeing photographs of fields where they once worked, and recalling the soft hum of phantom engines in the mist. Imagine them sharing stories with children, grandchildren, or fellow historians, bridging decades of silence with moments of quiet reflection and pride. The hidden world they inhabited, once invisible, now glows softly in the light of recognition, a testament to imagination, courage, and enduring human creativity. Chapter 13 is a pause, a quiet unveiling. It is the moment when decades of secrecy are lifted, when invisible deeds are acknowledged, and when personal stories finally find their place in the light. It teaches patience, humility, and the value of contributions that may remain unseen for years. Above all, it reminds us that sometimes the most profound acts of heroism are quiet, careful, and thoughtful, leaving subtle ripples that endure long after the moment has passed. And now, as we settle into the next chapter, we carry forward the memory of these quiet innovators, their ingenuity, their laughter, and their gentle courage, into the continuing story of memory, legacy, and reflection. Chapter 14, Memory and Legacy, with the declassification of the Ghost Army's operations in the 1990s. A quiet transformation began. What had once been hidden in archives and whispered in the memories of veterans slowly became part of the shared understanding of history. The men who had spent long hours arranging phantom soldiers, inflating tanks in misty valleys, and layering sound effects were finally recognized, not with grand parades or medals for heroism in the traditional sense, but through acknowledgement of their ingenuity, creativity, and subtle courage. Imagine museum halls where photographs of inflatable tanks are displayed, accompanied by faint sounds of distant engines, or exhibitions showing canvas soldiers positioned across rolling hills. These displays allow visitors to step into a quiet, surreal world where war was fought not just with weapons but with imagination. Through careful design, these exhibits capture the delicate balance of artistry and strategy that defined the Ghost Army. Each photograph, diagram, and artifact tells a story of men who wove deception, humor, and intelligence into the very fabric of military operations. Books, films, and documentaries followed, each gently peeling back layers of secrecy to reveal the human dimension of the Ghost Army. Veterans shared memories of long mornings in the mist, soft laughter at playful placements of dummy soldiers, and the quiet thrill of seeing operations succeed without conventional battle. These personal reflections remind us that history is not only made through grand gestures or visible victories, but also through quiet, thoughtful, and creative acts that ripple through time. Memorials now honor these unsung heroes, celebrating their unique contributions and offering a space for reflection. Plaques, exhibitions, and commemorative events acknowledge their ingenuity and their subtle heroism, ensuring that future generations understand the profound impact of creativity in moments of great tension. Visitors to these memorials are invited to imagine the soft mist rolling over hills, the careful placement of phantom tanks, and the invisible orchestration of operations that once shaped the course of battles. The legacy of the Ghost Army is not only historical but also philosophical. It challenges conventional notions of heroism, courage, and warfare by blending art, ingenuity, and strategic thinking. These men demonstrated that profound impact can be achieved without direct confrontation, violence, or dramatic displays of force. In doing so, they left lessons that extend far beyond the military context, lessons about patience, collaboration, creativity, and the enduring power of subtle action. One of the most striking aspects of this legacy is the idea that war, often defined by chaos and destruction, can also be a canvas for human ingenuity. The Ghost Army reminds us that even in the most difficult circumstances, creativity can thrive. Inflatable tanks, canvas soldiers, and sound recordings became tools of strategy, but they were also expressions of artistry, imagination, and problem solving. This duality, the intersection of practical strategy and creative expression, forms a core part of the Ghost Army's enduring story. Veterans who lived these experiences often reflect on their unique position in history. Unlike conventional soldiers, their contributions were invisible at the time, their work hidden from the broader world. Yet, they found satisfaction in knowing that lives had been preserved, that enemy forces had been misled, and that their ingenuity had altered outcomes. Recognition, when it finally came, was a gentle affirmation of the quiet impact they had made, a reminder that meaningful work does not always require applause or public acknowledgement. As we drift through this chapter, picture the landscapes where these operations unfolded: fog-laden valleys, soft morning light filtering through trees, and gentle hills dotted with invisible troops. Imagine veterans revisiting these sites decades later, walking slowly, recalling the delicate balance of fear, focus, and creativity. Their memories are layered not only of operational success, but also of the camaraderie, humor, and quiet joy that accompanied long hours of meticulous work. These recollections carry lessons about resilience, humility, and the enduring power of thoughtful action. The Ghost Army's story also serves as a reminder that memory itself is fragile and precious. The declassification process ensured that the hidden history was preserved, but it was also the personal stories of veterans, letters, diaries, and interviews that allowed the human dimension to be fully appreciated. Each memory, carefully recounted, becomes a bridge connecting past and present, allowing us to feel the rhythm of daily life within a secretive, extraordinary operation. In schools, documentaries, and public talks, the Ghost Army continues to inspire curiosity and reflection. Students learn that creativity is a tool as powerful as any weapon. Historians gain insight into unconventional warfare strategies, and the general public is invited to imagine, gently, the quiet heroism of men who shaped history with imagination rather than violence. The story, though rooted in wartime, becomes timeless in its lessons. Patience, creativity, collaboration, and quiet courage are values that endure in every era. As this chapter comes to a close, imagine the veterans gathered in small groups, sharing memories quietly, their laughter soft and muted. The fields of Europe stretch around them, serene and still, holding the echoes of phantom armies and invisible strategies. Their legacy is not just in the documents or exhibits, but in the minds and hearts of those who learn from their story, carrying forward lessons that transcend time, war, and circumstance. Chapter 14 is a meditation on remembrance and influence. It is a soft reflection on how human creativity can leave lasting impressions, how recognition may be delayed but still meaningful, and how quiet acts of ingenuity can shape history in profound ways. It reminds us that memory, when preserved, has the power to inspire, to teach, and to soothe, just as this gentle narration now carries you toward rest. Chapter 15, Closing Reflections. And now, as we reach the final chapter of our long journey through the story of the Ghost Army, it is time to settle into a quiet space of reflection. Imagine the mist lifting gently over European fields, the soft rustle of leaves in the morning air, and the faint echoes of phantom soldiers, now only a memory, lingering softly in the mind. This is a chapter without urgency, without action, a chapter meant to cradle your thoughts and guide them toward gentle rest. The Ghost Army's tale, as you have experienced it over these hours, is not only about warfare, tactics, or strategy. It is about the quiet courage of men who found inventive ways to save lives without raising a weapon. It is about artistry applied with purpose, imagination brought to bear in circumstances that demanded ingenuity. It is about laughter in the mist, subtle teamwork, and the delicate orchestration of events that changed history without ever being seen. Close your eyes for a moment and picture them, men in soft grey and green uniforms moving quietly across fog-laden hills, arranging inflatable tanks with careful precision, whispering instructions, laughing softly when the wind shifted a canvas soldier into a humorous pose. The soft hiss of the inflatables, the faint mechanical whir of sound devices, the careful alignment of phantom divisions, all these form a rhythm, a quiet cadence, a gentle pulse that carries the story forward. The declassified files, the photographs, the interviews, and the memoirs allow us to see their world now, decades later. Yet the true essence of the Ghost Army lives in those quiet moments, the moments of decision, of creativity, of subtle courage. In every placement of a fake tank or sound device, there was intention, care, and thoughtfulness. In every laughter-filled pause, there was humanity, warmth, and connection. And in the end, in the careful orchestration of invisible forces, there was profound impact. As the world learned of their deeds, recognition came softly. Memorials, documentaries, books, and exhibitions shared their story with those who had never known it. And yet, even with recognition, the story retains a gentle humility. These men were not seeking fame or accolades. They were performing their duties with care, creativity, and precision. Their heroism was quiet, subtle, and enduring, a reminder that not all acts that change the world are loud or celebrated. Now, in this final reflection, consider the lessons we can carry from their story into our own lives. Sometimes influence is subtle, sometimes courage is quiet, sometimes creativity, applied thoughtfully and persistently, can achieve what force alone cannot. The Ghost Army reminds us that solutions often lie in imagination, collaboration, patience, and a gentle understanding of the world around us. Imagine yourself walking slowly through those fields one last time, feeling the cool morning mist on your skin, the soft ground beneath your feet, and the calm beauty of a world where imagination triumphed over violence. Picture the veterans, now older, smiling quietly as they recall their invisible triumphs. Picture the phantom tanks, the canvas soldiers, and the faint hum of engines long silent, all resting gently in memory. And as you allow your thoughts to drift, let the rhythm of this story lull you further into calm. Let the quiet ingenuity, the subtle heroism, and the gentle creativity of the ghost army sink softly into your mind. Imagine the soft rustle of leaves, the faint whisper of wind, and the peaceful stillness of the world around them and around you. Art instead of bloodshed, illusions that saved lives, quiet courage in the mist, humor and humanity in the midst of war. These are the final echoes of the Ghost Army's story, and they leave us with gentle reminders for life, for reflection, and for rest. As your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts slow carry with you this quiet, meditative truth. Sometimes the most profound acts of bravery are those that leave no mark on the battlefield, only on the hearts and minds of those who remember. And now, as the story fades softly into memory, allow yourself to drift gently into sleep, carrying the rhythm, the calm, and the quiet lessons of the Ghost Army with you. Good night.